As long as there have been sports, there have been athletes who try to cheat the system in one way or another. And in baseball, before there were performance-enhancing drugs, before Pete Rose, before the Black Sox scandal, there was an OG of cheating in baseball. But his tale is a more complicated and nuanced story than you might think. A story that features gamblers, scandal, and even a sad premature death. So let's go back to the very beginning of baseball and talk about the long-forgotten Jim Devlin. His early years. Unfortunately, we don't have a ton of information on James Alexander Devlin in his younger days, but what we do know is that he was born in Philadelphia on June 6, 1849, and he absolutely, positively, undyingly loved baseball. And you have to remember, baseball was a pretty new sport at the time, and it didn't have the same long established traditions like we have now. Heck, at the time of his birth, only 30 of the 50 states had even been admitted to the Union that is the United States at this point. But from day one, this guy lived and breathed baseball. But something that you really have to keep in mind about baseball in Devlin's lifetime, and something that will play very dramatically into our story today, was that it was an extremely amateur sport. This makes sense, as the sport itself was so new, but it was also because the concept of being a professional paid athlete was a relatively new and obscure profession. Devlin and men like him were on the cutting edge of a major change where you could actually make money playing a sport. But even though you could make money, you didn't make much money. Like, you made basically peanuts and sometimes nothing at all. And it's this fact that would mark the beginning of both his athletic rise and his eventual downfall. His baseball career begins. Devlin's first paid position in baseball was in 1873 with his hometown Philadelphia White Stockings. The White Stockings were part of what was then called the National Association of Professional Baseball Players, or NA for short. This was the very first organized professional league for baseball, so to say he was pretty much on the ground floor of this is an understatement. He started out initially as a first baseman, but finished just a single season in Philadelphia before moving on to Chicago for 2 seasons. It was in Chicago where he really started to sort himself out as a ball player. Specifically, it was at this time that he shifted from being an infielder to becoming a pitcher because, for real, the dude could pitch. And he was an innovator too. He was known for what was then called a drop pitch, but today we'd call this a sinker, and it's believed he was the first person to ever throw this pitch. There's your fun fact for the day. Now, surprise, surprise, record keeping and statistics from these early years are spotty at best, but we do know that in the 1875 season, he pitched in 28 games for Chicago with mixed success. But it seemed like his career, and perhaps even baseball in general, might get derailed when the entire league folded at the end of that season. However, the gap left in professional organized baseball was quickly filled by what was then called the National League, which today is one half of modern Major League Baseball. Several new teams joined the league at this time, and Jim Devlin ended up landing with the Louisville Grays starting in the 1876 season. And it was this first season in Louisville where everything clicked for Devlin. He was the starting pitcher in 68 games that season, and he threw 66 complete games, and he pitched a psychotic 622 innings overall for the year. He had a teeny tiny earned run average of just 1.56, which is outstanding. And because he was good at what he did, he also batted .315 for the season, which led the team. This is a Shohei Ohtani performance, but it came a century and a half before Ohtani, and it was even nearly a half century before the other most famous pitcher-hitter combo of all time, Babe Ruth. But the vultures were circling. Temptation was everywhere. And in such a new league with a new team, it was very easy to see how even a good guy could be swayed in the wrong direction. Jim Devlin was a good guy, and Jim Devlin did indeed get swayed. The scandal. It's not like the gamblers hadn't circled the wagons around professional baseball before it took down Devlin. Indeed, during his immaculate first season in Louisville, there had actually been a minor preview of things to come. The right fielder for the Grays, a guy named George Betchel, had actually asked Devlin to help him throw a game for $500. Not only did Devlin honorably refuse, but he actually ratted him out to the management of the team, even passing along the incriminating telegrams as evidence. This resulted in a suspension for Betchel, but the storm clouds continued to brew. The reason baseball players at this time, and really for decades afterwards, were so tempted to throw games was because they made little money, or in some cases, no money. And I don't mean no money like they were volunteers or they did it for the fun. I mean sometimes they would simply not get paid by their team. This seems wild when we look at it through the lens of our modern sports era, but it was surprisingly common at the time. There was no union, no collective bargaining, no easily enforceable contracts, and very little in the way of protections for employees in any industry, let alone athletes. Plus, it was a new league and new teams, so they weren't exactly rolling in cash. So often, players could be swayed to earn extra money by throwing games. And though he was a super duper awesome pitcher for Louisville, and even though he had previously turned down money for throwing games, by the end of the 1876 season, Jim Devlin was getting a little desperate. Management of the team actually hadn't paid him for the last 2 months of the season, and he wanted to return home to Philadelphia for the centennial celebrations commemorating the 100-year anniversary of the country, but he couldn't even afford the train fare. Finally, when he started to struggle to put food on the table for his wife and son, he looked for a way to earn more. This actually started through legitimate means. He tried to get a move to the team in St. Louis for more money, at least that was the hope, but it was denied by the management of the Louisville team. The 1877 season began with Jim Devlin short on funds and playing for a team that not only wasn't paying him, but was barring him from going somewhere that would pay him. It was pretty clear where this was all going. And about halfway through the season, while playing road games in New York, Devlin was introduced to a betting man. And after that, Devlin and the Grays went into a suspicious tailspin, and obviously it wasn't a coincidence. After a strong, respectable first half of play that season, Devlin and a few of his teammates fell off the map in terms of performance. After looking like a slam dunk to win the pennant, Louisville went on a colossal and unexpected losing streak. Even before the last pitch was thrown that season, many thought this stunk of a fix, and it didn't take long for the whole thing to unravel. The aftermath. A Louisville-based sports writer named John Halderman began doing some digging when things started to look fishy for his local ball club. And sure enough, he would eventually uncover coded telegrams between Devlin and McLeod, his gambler friend, which were designed to highlight which games to throw. Suspicions were raised even further when, after the pennant had been officially lost, Louisville suddenly and miraculously went on a winning streak, and at the same time, some of the players began wearing fancier clothes, wearing fancier jewelry, and eating at fancier restaurants. It didn't take long for formal accusations to be made, and Devlin nearly immediately confessed. He admitted he was dumb and he took the money for his family, which made sense since, he wasn't being paid by his team, but it didn't matter. Devlin's case was to be handled by William Hulbert, the president of the National League, who was also the owner of the Chicago team where Devlin had previously played. But if he thought his old buddy would go easy on him, it was not to be. Wanting to take a stand against the gamblers and clean up what was then viewed as a professional sport that was just a little too corrupt, Hulbert came down fast and hard. Banishment for life was the verdict for Devlin as well as 3 other players involved in the scandal. This crushed Devlin, who loved baseball more than anything. Not only was his reputation in tatters, but the only career he had ever known was gone too. Jim Devlin tried relentlessly to get reinstated, applying every year to get back in and being denied each time. In a really sad story, it's said that he would loiter outside of National League owners' meetings, hoping against hope that one day they would come out and forgive him, but they never did. And even more sadly, this didn't go on for very long, as Jim Devlin would die from tuberculosis just a few years later in 1883. He was only 34 years old at the time. His short life ended up featuring the first time a baseball player lost his career for fixing games, though, as we know, it was most certainly not the last. So what do you think, folks? Is Jim Devlin a dirty, rotten cheater who deserved to be banned from baseball? Or is he simply a tragic figure who was forced into circumstances and he did what he had to do? Let me know what you think in the comments below. And otherwise, we'll be talking again soon.